Welcome back to another episode of Innovation Minutes Live. This is our first episode of 2018, and I am joined with my co-host Anna Akbari.
Hello.
Today we're talking about 2018, and I think we're going to call this the year that cannabis goes mainstream.
Yeah, I think so. I think that's a big story in innovation right now, especially because as of right now, it's officially legal in California, and that makes California the biggest cannabis market in the world. And that state alone will eclipse even Canada, the entire country of Canada, when it becomes legal there later this year. And we have increasingly more states that are legalizing, despite the fact that our current attorney general is pushing back hard on that. His resistance is being met with equal resistance. And so we really don't see the states backing down on this issue, in part because there's a lot of money in this space. And so from an innovation perspective, it's interesting because previously we've seen industries disrupted via innovation, whether it's transportation in the taxi industry or hospitality with Airbnb, or entertainment with Netflix, Spotify. But this is different because it's an entirely new industry that's being created. And so the opportunities for innovation are endless, but there will be some best practices and key players that are going to emerge.
Yeah, well, I think it's funny you say it's a new industry when, I think we both know that it's actually a very, very old industry. Not industry in the traditional sense, but the drug itself, the plant, having been used for all the stuff it's been used for over thousands and thousands of years, it's now kind of come full circle. I don't want to speak too soon because it's not like it's globally legal or anything, but the momentum is pushing it in that direction. So it's really interesting to see how that's starting to take shape. Here in California, we're now seeing there's pretty heavy regulation as there is in Colorado and Washington, and it's interesting to see as we become legal now here in January, what that means for consumers, what it means for businesses in this space, what it means for existing industries like food and beverage and alcohol and
Back
pharma and tobacco.
wellness industry.
Yeah, it's just a very interesting time, and it'll be interesting to see what the big changes are for this year. Do you have any predictions?
Well, I think that there's going to be some first movers within established industries. So I think we'll see some big pharma, some tobacco, some food and beverage, some wellness uh, organizations that are already mainstream, recognizing an opportunity and dipping their toe in, whether that means they're investing in companies, whether that means they're trying to launch their own products, what partnerships. There's a million different ways that they can start to dabble, but I think we're going to start to see some first movers in each of those categories, and that they're going to kind of set the tone for other established organizations in their field who are going to say, who are going to start to follow their lead and look for best practices and missteps and try to figure out how they can get in the game as well.
Yeah, I think that the conversation about what do existing incumbent in these industries that are potentially going to be disrupted, what do
Yeah.
they do and how can they compete, right? Because the cannabis startups are small and nimble, and while there are a lot of regulatory issues that they have to deal with, their threshold for risk is obviously a lot different than these entrenched players in these industries. So they do have an advantage in that way. But like you said, there's a lot that existing um, players in these different verticals can do. And we've heard of companies going to Canada to kind of use that as their
Yep.
petri dish for experimentation. Obviously California is a very large market, and I don't want to say that doing experimental activity in California protects you in any way, because if you have operations in a red state, uh, that could get a little dicey. But it is a very large market. There's a lot of political support here for this kind of activity. So the chances of, well, I don't know. Lawyers can make the decision about what the chances of getting in trouble for that kind of thing are. But I think the point is that there's a lot of options.
There's a lot of options, and I think to that point, there's a lot of gray area right now.
Yeah.
And so it's going to take some. There is going to be a certain amount of risk. This is not going to be a completely safe zone, and so it's going to take some strategic, calculated risk on the part of some existing, established, mainstream companies to get in the game and to help really to solve some of the key hurdles and challenges that I think face the earlier stage cannabis startups or the legacy cannabis startups, whether it's distribution or negotiating regulation in certain ways. You know, some of these mainstream companies have a distinct advantage over the startups and the existing cannabis companies. And so I think, you know, one thing we can look for, what are those bridges being built between the two to make this really mutually beneficial in a very crafty way that is able to operate in all of this gray territory, which is really what most of the cannabis space is right now, is a lot of gray
completely
territory.
gray. Yeah.
So we would love to hear your predictions for this year with regard to, you know, whether this will be the year of cannabis and where cannabis becomes mainstream, what you think will happen, what you think the challenges will be. So please let us know in the comments what you're thinking about with regard to the emerging new industry of cannabis. And we'll talk to you next week.
Yep. See you next week.